The story starts with our female protagonist, Parashati Jahart, sitting with the male protagonist, Theodore Dane Lapilléon. Determined, she asks him to make a deal with her. She requests that he marry her for 1 year. There was nothing special or outstanding about Parashati Jahart. She is just the daughter of an ordinary count, except for the fact that both her parents are dead now. The remaining family members included Sif, her lover, who always supports her, a warm stepmother, and Reina, her younger stepsister. She regarded them as precious, and they always stood by her side, empathizing during good and bad times. She had promised to cherish them forever. At least that's what she thought. Soon they start to plot to kill her and take all her fortune. They had cursed her so she could not move. Sif smirks and explains that the curse was expensive, but it was the best option to kill her without leaving any evidence. Her stepmother and Reina also stood near her deathbed, snickering. Her stepmother tells her that it is all her father's fault. He hadn't written a will in their name, so they had to do this. Reina happily asks her mother if they will be rich now. Sif looks at Reina and smiles. The bastard tells her that they will be. He embraces her as her lover. Seeing this, Parashati is now more stunned than ever. She had believed in him, but this seems not to be so true for her now. Reina yells at her if she really thinks Sif is her husband. She confesses that Sif married her because she asked him to and pretended to love her. Parashati is overwhelmed by the sudden exposure to the true faces of her precious family. Everything until now has been a three-person play. The husband she loved, the stepmother who loved her, and her kind sister were all a play. As she lies motionless, her eye fills with tears as she clenches her heart. Her stepmother picks up a pillow and approaches Parashati. She evilly grins and tells her that after she dies, they will use her inheritance well. She then suffocated her to death with the pillow. As she dies, she sees Sif and Reina acting like a lovey-dovey couple and vows to never forgive them, even if she dies bitterly. And everything turns dark. When she opens her eyes, she sees herself in the presence of excessive light. At first, she thought she had died, but it wasn't true. She wonders if she is dreaming. At first, there was no distinction between what was real and what was not. She wonders how long it has been since her father passed away. It must have been more than a month already, but all records were stopped at some point in the past. Even if Parashati asks the workers, they will say the same thing, and her stepmother and Reina will act as if nothing happened. Everything is going according to the flow she saw in her dream. But she doesn't get it. The feeling of dying still seemed very real to her. Was that really a dream? Or has she gone crazy? But it didn't take long for her to understand the situation. She realized it when she saw Sif carrying a bouquet at the same time, in the same place. It had happened to her before, and that is when she realized that she had come back to the past, back in time, when she wasn't betrayed. Parashati still didn't know why she came back in time, but she knew she couldn't miss this opportunity to protect her life and inheritance. After that day, she realized the reality of her situation. Since she is an ordinary count's daughter, she is unable to take revenge. At that time, all she could do was ask Sif to go back. There is still no guarantee that Parashati will not get killed by the stepmother Reina or Sif in the meantime. It is because of the curse Sif mentioned in her previous life. She wonders what kind of curse it is. And she also couldn't understand why they wanted her to marry Sif if her stepmother's main purpose was the inheritance. But one thing was for sure. She needed time. But first, she had to ensure her safety, and she needed to find a way to do that. The butler asks her to come in, and so she enters through the door of the Grand Duke's office. She greets the Grand Duke, Theodore, knowing she needs that man's help. The Lapilléon family was an important family in the empire. The predecessor Lapilléon helped the former emperor and was recognized for making the Castor Empire grow into the great empire it is today. Hence, he was awarded the title of Grand Duke. It was a natural procedure because he had been a close aide to the imperial family and had been ahead of the war against the rebels. And at present, the Grand Duke is Theodore Lapilléon. The Castor Empire fought a war against the Kingdom of Schwartz. People all think the victory of the imperial army was natural, but the Schwartz kingdom was unexpectedly powerful, and so the people were exhausted from the long-running war. At that time, The Grand Duke Theodore and his knights came from their distant dukedom to aid in the war, and the kingdom fell quickly. All the people of the empire praised him as a hero. However, the Grand Duke appeared with his body covered in blood and did not participate in the victory party. Those who saw him feared him. They called him a madman in a war filled with blood and death. But now, he has come back to the capital for a reason, and that is marriage. He had only invited Parashati out of curiosity, as she has repeatedly requested to see him in person. He looks coldly at Parashati and asks why he should marry her. Parashati is trembling at this point as she thinks of how Theodore was married in the past. But the lady he married used to persistently stalk her, and so he divorced her in less than 2 months. His ex-wife received her alimony and disappeared, saying that Theodore was the worst man ever and had not even spent the first night. Rumor has it that he had never seen his wife. Therefore, Parashati had come to him for help. He wasn't interested in wealth enough to become greedy for her inheritance, and he was also not interested in women. So there is no need to spend the first night with him. Parashati tells him that her family will soon kill her and inherit her legacy. But Theodore is unamused and asks if she has come here to say this, surprising Parashati. He tells her that it is baseless anxiety and stands up to walk away. He asks her to stop and go back. Parashati ponders for a moment, but then quickly grabs his hand. Theodore is taken aback by the gesture and swiftly shoves his hand away from her. This shocks Parashati, and she notices his hand bleeding. When he shoved his hand away from hers, he was hurt by her ring in the process. She stands up and hastily apologizes, but he just stares at her indifferently and asks her to go back. As he walks away, Parashati stops him. She protests that he will really need her as his wife. She was aware of the exact reason why he had come to the capital. It was to marry the 7th princess and to make it look as if he was searching for a second wife. In Parashati's past life, the Duke was forced to go to the capital because the Emperor wanted him to marry his daughter. Because the Emperor wanted a talented Duke to be near him. Even though Theodore was divorced, he extolled him as a hero of the empire and pushed the marriage recklessly. But the Duke hated the imperial family to death. Parashati still remembers his glum face and the tears of the 7th princess, who complained she didn't want to marry an old man. This is why the Duke has no other choice but to marry another woman to avoid it. Hearing Parashati's words, Theodore is taken aback. Parashati tells him about his problem with the Emperor, skipping the part that she saw in the past. She confidently tells him that he will need her and promises to divorce neatly after a year. Theodore ponders for a while. Meanwhile, Parashati pleads mentally for him to agree since she doesn't have any other backup plan. Her thoughts are cut off instantly as Theodore says that she misunderstood. He further says that the person the Emperor is pushing for marriage is not the 7th but the 4th princess, and rejects her request once again. Parashati now doesn't know what to do and is panicking. Suddenly, she falls to the floor. Her vision is woozy as she sees Theodore coming to her aid. She felt as if she would die, again. Being unable to breathe, everything turned dark. Later that night, 2 men were busy digging a grave for Parashati to be buried. But suddenly, the once-dead Parashati wakes up abruptly, scaring the men to death who called her a witch. Parashati notices where she is, covered in mud and rain. The men run away, screaming that it's a ghost. Meanwhile, Parashati finally realizes what is happening. The fact that she was buried alive shocks her to her core. She turns around to see the Grand Duke looking at her in shock. She trembles in rage at the thought of him burying her. She thinks of it as a plot to kill her. No matter how crazy he was, Parashati had never expected him to be such a person. She is cut off from her thoughts as Theodore mutters that it was strange of her to come back to life. He extends his hand toward her and asks her to get out of that hole first if she really doesn't want to be buried. Hearing this, she is surprised that Theodore hadn't planned on burying her. She takes his hand and is pulled out of the hole. She is taken inside the Duke's mansion then. She convinces herself to calm down. She is aware that she was careless in relying on her past memory to find this person. And because of this, she was about to be buried alive and get killed. She asks him if he intends to kill her. Theodore pauses and changes the topic, asking if biting her nails is a habit of hers. He shows her his previously injured hand and explains to her that she held his wounded hand earlier. But Parashati doesn't understand. Theodore smiles and picks up his pen, injuring himself again. Parashati tries to protest that he tried to kill him, but is surprised to see blood coming out of his hand. Theodore approaches her and apologizes for checking it again, but tells her it was an important issue. He grabs her mouth with his blood-stained hand, surprising Parashati. Parashati instantly feels dizzy and collapses once again. After a while, she wakes up panting and screaming. Theodore was standing beside the bed, staring at her, along with some maids. The stunned Parashati stares at him in fear as he orders the maid to go outside. She doesn't understand what is going on or how she has become alive again. She had felt the same pain and death as at that time, but clearly didn't die. Seeing Theodore's face like this, it doesn't seem to Parashati that she has gone back in time. So what has really happened? She trembles, moving to the furthest corner of the bed, and fearfully asks Theodore who he is and if she came back to life. He flatly tells her that there is a curse placed on the Lapilleon family. Those who carry the blood of this family will have poison in their bodies. And when they are born, the immune system to this poison is also very strong, so even if Theodore drinks normal poison, he won't die. But just a few drops of his blood will kill people instantly. Hearing this, Parashati freezes in shock. She has heard that the Lapilleon family is known to be the cursed house. Although they won the war and led the empire to victory, in reality, they lived a closed life. People who are related to this family are often short-lived. Maybe that is why the Lapilleon family with their red eyes is considered bad luck. Parashati had thought of the cursed house as just a name that contained people's fears. But if it is true, then she touched the blood of the Grand Duke on the ring. She immediately realizes what she has done and why Theodore tried to bury her. As the sudden realization dawns on her, she turns speechless. Theodore continues that Parashati should have died, but it's a miracle she didn't. He continues, saying that she knows her family's secrets now. Parashati turns scared and clarifies that she didn't hear anything. Theodore smiles, but Parashati argues that she is serious. He tells her that he was going to decline her offer, but now has no other choice. Parashati, thinking Theodore is talking about killing her, pleads not to do so. Theodore smiles at her and tells her that he will make her his wife for a year. This surprises her, but suddenly she notices that she is wearing a different set of clothes. Theodore assures her that she has been changed by the maids. The scene shifts to Parashati visiting her father's grave. She remembers her father's promise to keep her safe after her mother's death. She wonders if that is the reason he brought in her stepmother and Reina, who had no connection whatsoever. Parashati's weak father always used to worry about her. She looks up at the sky and tells her father that she is marrying a warrior. Suddenly, her stepmother, Reina, and Sif appear by her side. Her stepmother asks what she has thought of having an agent since the responsibility of being a count must be too much for her. She takes out a handkerchief and fakes sorrow, telling Parashati that she has not been suffering alone. But now, Parashati is aware that her stepmother will hire someone to kill her and has no intention to repeat the tragic past. Parashati hands her an envelope and walks away. As they read it, they were shocked. Parashati smiles at them and tells them that she has decided to marry Grand Duke Lapilleon, and tells Sif that they should break up. Her family is speechless, but they immediately explode. They yell at her that she loves Sif. Sif also asks what he has done wrong or if she didn't like the proposal. Parashati calmly tells them that her uncle in the east decided to come as the maternal representative, and so her stepmother and Reina should not enter the main building. Hearing this, they become too stunned to speak. Parashati continues that outsiders are not allowed to set foot in any part of the mansion, especially Sif. She then ignores his protests and walks away. Sif, who used to be a regular knight, was now in trouble because of her sudden marriage. He lost his qualifications for the Imperial Knight's examination, which could only be seen by nobles. But this was only the beginning of Parashati's revenge, and she vows to make Sif lose more in the future. Soon, Parashati enters into a marriage contract with Theodore. Externally, it was wrapped up as a fateful meeting where they fell in love at first sight. But Parashati was sure no one would believe it. The one-year contract guaranteed her safety, and in return, Theodore decided to examine her body ethically for a year to see how she was immune to the curse. And now their so-called gorgeous wedding is over. She sighs in relief. It was exhausting for her, as she had expected to be killed before finishing off Sif. They had gotten hastily married in just 3 days, and all the decorations as well as their clothes were far too flashy and looked rather messed up. So she is glad to have changed her clothes now. The nobles looked at them with suspicious eyes the whole time, but she could understand. They might think there is a secret interest between them since they married so hastily to prevent Theodore from marrying the princess. On the other hand, the Grand Duke wasn't even trying to hide this fact. But Parashati knew she would have been distraught if she had married him for real. As she grabs his arm, Theodore pushes her away. He asks if she wants to extend the terms of the contract, to which Parashati smiles and says she will think about it. But in reality, she hated it. She understands his curse but doesn't want to stay with him for more than a year, no matter what. And she doubts one thing. The day she first died, Sif clearly said it was because of the curse. And the pain she felt at that time coincided with the curse of the Lapilleon family. She imagines asking Theodore if he sells family blood as poison. Theodore will definitely be stunned and angrily ask her why she is saying this. And when she tells him that it's because she died in the past, it will infuriate him more than ever. So she decided not to ask, convincing herself that the Lapilleon family is not like that. She notices some people ahead and decides to disappear from their sight. But she suddenly hears an angry voice calling Theodore. They both turn to look at an angry princess. She was the 4th princess, Dodolea Ina Castor. She was born weak and was unable to even get out of bed. She was an unfortunate princess who was slowly dying. Parashati wasn't sure why the past had changed, but seeing her, it seemed true that she had fully recovered. Theodore greets the princess with respect and asks how she got there. Dodolea clenches her umbrella in rage and asks if he really married someone other than her. Her voice turns heavier as she asks if there is anyone else who loves him as much as she does. Seeing this, Parashati is surprised. She had thought it was a one-sided marriage pushed by the emperor, but now it seems the princess wanted it. She notices Theodore's cold gaze. The princess looks at him with furious eyes and says that she can't live without him. Parashati gasps in shock, making Dodolea and Theodore look toward her. Dodolea approaches Parashati in anger and says she doesn't want her here. She is interrupted by another voice. It was a red-haired woman. She greets the princess with a smile and tells her that it is inappropriate to create a scene in front of everyone. People had indeed gathered around, wondering what was going on. Theodore swiftly bows and announces that they will go away. As they walk away, the princess smirks and warns him that she has no intention to live without him. As Parashati walks away with Theodore, she turns anxious. She didn't know the princess loved the Grand Duke so much, and she mentally asks the princess to wait for just a year. The scene shifts to Parashati riding in a carriage with Theodore and the red-haired woman. She wonders if they are family since they were going to the Lapilleon's mansion together. She thanks the woman for her help. Theodore calmly tells her that she's her elder sister, shocking Parashati. The woman introduces herself as Saoirse Lapilleon. Parashati turns nervous and respectfully greets her. Saoirse remarks that she has heard the family curse doesn't affect her and asks why exactly she married the Duke. Parashati is taken aback by the question, not knowing what to say. But Theodore responds that they fell in love at first sight and asks if Saoirse has any other questions. Saoirse chuckles and asks if he really thinks she will believe this foolish story. She turns angry and says that every imperial nation knows they married hastily to avoid the emperor. She keeps yelling at him for making their family seem ridiculous, making Parashati more nervous than ever. She turns to look at Theodore, but he doesn't say anything. The air in the carriage turns heavy. Parashati stares at Saoirse. She notices that the people of the Lapilleon family only wear tight-fitting clothes. She knows Saoirse is clearly not immune to heat either, but the dress looks pretty uncomfortable. She turns to open the window just a crack, causing Saoirse and Theodore to look at her in curiosity. Suddenly, the carriage bumps, making Parashati lose her balance and fall back on the Duke. She turns nervous and apologizes to him. Theodore glares at him, irritated, causing Saoirse to burst into laughter. Theodore and Parashati turn to look at her as she comments that Theodore looks stupid. She continues laughing tearfully and comments that Parashati is funny. Parashati is immediately relieved, even though she didn't mean to do it. Theodore's face was still angry, but his mood softened. She wonders if the rest of their family is also not scary. By sunset, they arrive at the gigantic mansion. Parashati is astounded by the size of their house. Suddenly, a guard appears and tells them that a commotion is preventing them from entering. Parashati curiously looks outside and finds a boy arguing with someone. Grand Duke Theodore remarks that Celpius has arrived. Celpius is Lapileon's future successor. Parashati immediately realizes who Celpius is arguing with and starts trembling, wondering why he is here. The Duke notices this and walks out of the carriage. Meanwhile, Sif is screaming to meet Parashati, but Celpius looks at him with threatening eyes and says it isn't a place for a person like him to come. But Sif continues screaming for Parashati, making Celpius furious. He grabs a sword and threatens to kill Sif. As he is about to wield the sword, a hand grabs him. Celpius notices it's Theodore and is surprised. Sif turns to look and finds an angry Parashati approaching him. He asks to talk, but she tells him that she doesn't love him anymore. As he protests, Theodore orders the guards to drag him away. As they walk inside, Theodore asks Parashati if he is the man she says will kill her. She agrees. Theodore said that he and Celpius had to talk privately before leaving her in the butler's care and disappearing. It's already been 2 hours, and she wonders if she should eat first. She didn't know Sif would chase him to the Lapileon mansion. She is now embarrassed to face the people of this house from now on. The incident was so sudden that it didn't look good, and she also wonders about Celpius. She had heard that Lapileon's heir was recuperating on the outskirts of the countryside. There are so many secrets in this family that Parashati is afraid she can't distinguish which ones are real. Besides, the Grand Duke didn't teach her anything. All of a sudden, the Grand Duke appears and sits beside her. Parashati asks about Celpius, to which Theodore tells her he doesn't want to eat. But Parashati is aware that Theodore messed up and scolded him. She asks Celpius's age, and Theodore tells her he is 9 years old. She further asks if he is the Duke's child, but this time it is met with awkward silence. Parashati is aware that the boy looks too old to be Theodore's son, as he was only married for 2 months. But she couldn't help but notice how similar they looked. She wonders if he is an extramarital child, but rumors claim that the Duke wasn't interested in women. After a while, Theodore speaks up and tells her that since she will be here for a year, she should know that Celpius is his brother's son. His words make Parashati astonished, and she immediately turns red with embarrassment at her previous thoughts. Of course, Celpius was his brother's son. That is why they look so similar. She then asks where his brother has gone and if Theodore is taking care of Celpius instead. Theodore sullenly tells her his brother is dead, and since his sister-in-law abandoned Celpius, he adopted him as his heir. By now, Parashati is more nervous than ever. No matter how secretive a family may be, how can a story like this go unnoticed in the social world? Theodore then assures her that she doesn't need to worry, as Celpius will be sent back to the countryside. But Parashati still feels uncomfortable and stands up, excusing herself. She starts to walk to her bedroom, but the maid asks if she should escort her. But Parashati rejects it politely. As she walks towards the bedroom, she regrets making a mistake. The more she tries, the more she feels like a mess. She wonders if the child will be okay. She soon sees a maid standing outside a room. She asks what she is doing here and whose room it is. The maid bows respectfully and tells her it is Celpius's room and that she had brought dinner, but he won't open the door. Parashati knows he must be upset since he's been scolded. She contemplates for a moment and then asks the maid to give the tray to her. The maid tries to protest, but Parashati makes her give in. She opens the door, making Celpius enraged as to who tried to open the door, but he sees her standing there and pauses. She sits beside him on the bed and introduces herself. But Celpius coldly asks her if she is pretending to be polite to impress the Duke. He says she shouldn't have come here. He stands up and asks her to leave. Parashati hesitatingly tries to say something but notices Celpius's swollen eyes. She extends her hand to touch his face and softly remarks that he cried. But seeing his startled face, she retreats. Suddenly, Celpius grabs her by her dress and pushes her out of his room. He coldly asks her not to pay attention to him again and slams the door shut. Parashati is shocked. With this, the video ends. Parashati has successfully managed to protect herself from her greedy family. But will she be able to take revenge on them and change her tragic fate? Most of all, why was the Lapileon family cursed? Will her immune nature towards it aid her relationship with the Grand Duke's family? Stay tuned to find out what happens next.